Hello, everyone. Welcome to Class 4. This class, what we're going to talk about are some strengths and gaps and how do you analyze that. But before we get started, again, a quick reminder, please go to the subreddit Positive Change and continue some discussions after listening to this lesson there. Again, it's important to try to participate as much as possible. Uh, okay, just so a quick review. We look at here's a model for change, and this is the model that we're going to use for groups and for groups. And it starts off with the ideal self or the shared vision at the top. So what is the shared vision that we have as a group? We talked about that. And now we're going to talk about the real self, or basically the performance competencies and gaps. But just as a quick review, let's talk a little bit about what we talked about last time, and we said that there's a couple different ways to create a shared vision, and one of those ways is really around co-creation. Okay, and the co-creation, again, it's really about getting everyone together, looking at how do we build off of the strengths versus any kind of deficits that we have, and really taking a look at how do we energize people. And we talked about appreciative inquiry and how that was a great example of a way that you can actually create a shared vision. And if you look under the class 3 under the University of Reddit, there's actually an example of an interview guide, as well as the step-by-step process and the output that we came up with as part of a strategy initiative for an organization called Organization Change Alliance, which is based in Atlanta. They're a nonprofit. It's an interesting example in the case study. And if you have any questions, just go to the subreddit Positive Change and post your questions there. I'd be happy to answer them. Okay. We talked a little about that appreciative inquiry process, and again, if you're curious, there's definitely a lot of resources that you can access. But basically, it's let's take a look at a high point story in someone's life to be able to get them primed. Let's interview people and ask them these questions, and then let's bring them together in larger groups of about 6 to 8, and then from there see what themes come up. And after the themes come up, we have people vote on what they actually want to go and tackle and what they want to address and what they want to move forward with. And it's similar to open space technology in terms of voting. And that really, all that does is, again, help creates a shared vision that everyone's aligned to and really energized about. So the next step, after you get all of this information, you get all of your, you get your shared vision as a group. Then you have to go into, okay, well, what are our strengths and gaps relative to what we just decided what we wanted to do. Well, we're probably going to have a good idea of our strengths just because of the exercise of an appreciative inquiry, just what comes out of that naturally. The gaps are usually, they're not difficult to find. I mean, people really almost train to see deficits and really train to see what's broken, what's wrong. So most of you who are, if you're in a corporate setting, I know that won't be too much of an issue to find out what's wrong and what you need help with, but try to frame it in terms of what your goals are. So the OCA, the Organization Change Alliance, one of the goals was rebranding, and how do we actually rebrand the organization to be a little bit more cutting edge. And what they decided to do was say, okay, well, one of our gaps is that we don't have anyone that's a marketing expert in our group, so we have to go find that expertise somehow. And on a last note here, when you're actually doing your strengths and gaps analysis, try not to spend too much time in the gaps, because if you remember from the first class, we gave you an example. We asked you to close your, I asked you to close your eyes and think of a time when you had a bad boss, and think of a time when you were playing with your niece or nephew or your child. And if you remember the two responses, if you remember how you felt when you thought about a bad boss, how it triggered a stress response. Well, what will happen is if you spend too much time looking at gaps, people get that beat down feeling, that exhausted feeling, that stress response tends to get activated if you stay there too long. You may have felt it having conversations in a team meeting at any point in time in your career, how if you just look at the negatives, it just feels like things just don't feel right. Things just feel like they just bring you down a little bit. And the reason for that, again, is your flight or fight response. Whenever humans or whenever people, when we get into negative space or talk about negative things too long, we can actually stimulate that stress response. Okay. There's not too much to say about this, except I want to give you a quick way of breaking out your strengths and gaps. You may want to separate them into two different categories, situational and systemic. So really framing them as what are systemic gaps and problems, and what are situational gaps and problems, as well as what are systemic strengths and situational strengths. What that means, systemic strengths and gaps, what that means is that we want you to take a look at things that might be strengths or gaps that are enduring. Basically, they're the ones that are there all the time. For instance, one example that we came across with the Organization Change Alliance, one of the strengths that they really had is they have really excellent programming that not many people know about. So that's a strength that we can rely on that's been there for years and years and years. One of the gaps that we found was that it tends to be very academic, and a lot of the presentations are very academic. So we tended to attract a specific type of crowd to these types of meetings. And so that gives you an example of something that's been happening for a very long time. Now, when we talk about situational strengths and gaps, we'll use the marketing example again. So a strength would be the fact that we have a lot of energy, a lot of folks who are less academic now who are in the organization. So that would be a strength that we could pull on. Whereas with a situational gap, again, this is a gap where we don't have marketing knowledge that's necessarily anyone who's a marketing expert on the team. So that's a gap that we'd have to address. So again, really separate long-term embedded strengths and weaknesses, as well as maybe some of the more short-term or situational strengths and weaknesses. So you get an idea of what needs to be addressed and how hard it may be to address each one of these. So this is a pretty short module, and again, go to the subreddit Positive Change for questions, conversations, comments, and love to hear you share your strengths and your gaps that you seem to find with your project or one that you're about to start. And again, please participate in the conversations to enhance your learning. That does it for this module. We're going to have one more module, and that's going to be module number 5 or class number 5, and we're going to cover strategic and action plans as well as social capital in that one.